Yeah.
Everyone, welcome. Lovely to see you all here. There we have a book talk with the recently published and now also highly acclaimed first review has come. It's published book, Working with Manuscripts, a guide for textual scholars. And it's our own Ingeborg and our own Brent, Nongbri, who are the authors. So, setup is as usual. Not quite as usual. 30 minutes for you guys, 30 minutes for Q&A, and 10 minutes of eating cake. All right? So that's the setup for today. Anyway, yeah, over to you guys.
All right. Well, thanks so much for hosting us. And yeah, so we'd like to talk about our book. So this has been, I guess, about 5 years in the making. We were started to brainstorm about this, I think, in 2020. And what we wanted to do was to produce a kind of guide for our younger selves, because we both came into manuscript studies from other disciplines and learned a lot from colleagues and also learned a lot kind of ourselves, making some mistakes along the way, but picking up lots of good tips. And what we wanted to do was to have just a kind of recording of this for students. We thought this would be a really useful kind of thing, a way to enter into manuscript studies from other disciplines when you might have training in ancient languages and other fields in biblical studies, but be able to teach yourself in a responsible way to begin to work with manuscripts, which can be a kind of intimidating subfield. So we wanted the book to be short and readable and a textbook essentially for use in a classroom, but also if someone just wants to pick it up and learn some things about how to get into manuscript studies. So I have worked with Yale University Press for my previous two books, and they were game for experimenting with this kind of format. And so it's quite nice. They've ended up doing illustrations in the book and also boxes, and there's a glossary of key terms at the end. So it really is a kind of textbook for use with students. And I'll just give a really brief rundown of the contents. What we wanted to do was not really produce an introduction to manuscript studies because these kinds of things already exist and they're very good. What we envisioned here was a really like a practical guide. So we talk a little bit about manuscripts as artifacts with a very brief introduction to the physical form of manuscripts, but then it's just practical tips. So there's a chapter on finding your manuscripts, like navigating all the crazy sets of abbreviations that one encounters when working with manuscripts, figuring out how to physically locate the manuscript. And then there's a chapter on provenance, that is the history of your manuscript as an artifact and how you work with that, how that intersects with ethical concerns about the antiquities trade, and what kinds of questions you may want to ask yourself when you're getting into working with manuscripts. Then we have chapters on really, really practical things like getting access. How do you contact a library? How do you contact a museum? How do you contact a monastery to set up access? And then how do you plan a visit? What kinds of things do you need to remember to bring with you? What kinds of activities do you need to do beforehand to prep yourself for a trip? Then in the reading room with your manuscript, what kinds of things do you bring with you actually to the reading room itself to interact with the manuscript? How can you navigate the the reading room of a library or museum as a social space? How do you understand the different hierarchies you might encounter? All of these things we kind of worked out on our own over the years. And then the final chapters are dealing with the practicalities after you've had your encounter with the manuscripts. What do you do when you get back home? How do you organize all the data that you've collected? And then finally, asking for help. Uh, both of us have run into walls where all of our resources are exhausted, and there are really some things that you can only find out from people who've done this before more than you. And so we go through how you approach an expert, how you ask a question in a way that is going to hopefully result in you getting the helpful information that you need. And then finally, how do you publish things? How do you navigate copyrights and permissions? And how can you bring images of manuscripts into the publications that you're producing? So that's a kind of quick overview of the contents. And now I'll turn it over to Liv to talk a little bit more about yeah, what we wanted to accomplish with this.
So, well, there are three things at least that we wanted to accomplish. And those things were first to, as Brent said, to write the book that we wished we had when we started to work on manuscripts. So we wanted to kind of say explicitly parts of what has been tacit knowledge in the field. So that was the first aim. The second aim has to do with getting manuscripts integrated into textual scholarship and how to do that. So that is the second thing. And the third thing has to do with provenance and ethics, and to make that a natural part of what you deal with if you are working on material artifacts, on heritage artifacts. So those were, there's more, but those are the three major ones. And I'll say a little bit about the two first ones now. The first one had to do with tacit knowledge. So the things that we're talking about here are the things that Brent said a little bit about, but it's all these things that make you, blush or feel shame or whatever it is that you do not know because you assume that everyone else knows, but they don't. and we've been through all that of, the blushing and feeling shameful and doing mistakes and all these things. And so this is just like putting it out there and tell you that, okay, do you wear gloves or do you not wear gloves? What will they expect you to bring with you? Do you need proof of residence? Do you bring your passport? What do you do when you enter the reading room? How do you talk with conservators? These kinds of things, and also what to wear and not. Go to lunch before you're too hungry, because you may end up harm the manuscript if you're too hungry or if you're rushing. All these kind of things that you don't even, they don't tell you in school. Those are the things that we wanted to kind of, communicate. And then the second aim has to do with getting manuscripts integrated to textual scholarship. And that may sound a bit strange if you're outside textual scholarship, but if you're in textual scholarship, you know that most of us didn't, or we usually haven't worked on manuscripts. We've been working on textual editions, which means that there are lots of textual scholars who have never seen a manuscript, even though that is the source for the text that you're working on. And Brent and I think that during your career as a textual scholar, you should at least have seen one manuscript so that you know what you're talking about. So that's where we put the bar. See one. So there are chapters here on manuscripts as material artifacts. We're going through the anatomy of codices and scrolls. We are providing some examples of scholarship that has been dealing with texts and manuscripts and what comes out of that. And also examples of procedures, what to do with the manuscript when you're sitting there in the reading room and you are looking at a manuscript as a person who does more than just read text. So, and then, of course, there is also some thoughts about a larger goal here that, of course, we want to impact the field in this way. We want people to deal with manuscripts. And writing then a textbook is maybe more efficient than writing another article. Third goal.
Yeah, the third goal was, as Liv said, to try to make ethical considerations just a kind of normal part of manuscript studies. So the chapter that we have in here on provenance is one aspect of that. But throughout the book, we keep coming back to the topic of colonialism, which is just a big part of manuscript studies, given the colonial dynamics that undergird almost all of the library and museum and private collections in Europe and North America. So that's something that everyone in the field has been aware of for, uh, at some level, I would say, for the last 50 years, but it's something that's really become a more pressing concern in the last 20 years. And so there's been a lot of uh, individual studies of manuscripts or collections focusing on issues of provenance, issues of international treaties and national laws, and how the movement of manuscripts intersects with legal and ethical questions. But what we wanted to do here was to try to just make consideration of those questions a normal step in the process. And so just as, you're going to take a certain set of measurements when you're dealing with a codex, you're also going to ask a certain set of questions before you get the codex out in front of you. And those questions are, or include at least, how did this manuscript get to this library where I'm now looking at it? And the answers to that question determine how you proceed with this. And so we really wanted to just make that a normal part of the study of manuscripts.
And I think that's all we have to say,
Yeah.
isn't it? So here's the book, and it has certain goals, and this is it.
Yeah.
Okay.